Everyone avoided the black man at the wedding, until the bride said his name and everything changed. The grand palace ballroom was filled with elegant guests when Daniel arrived. His simple, well-pressed suit contrasted with the designer tuxedos and haute couture dresses that dominated the room. At 35, he had driven 3 hours from the capital to be there, but now he wondered if it had been a good idea. "Excuse me, do you have an invitation?" asked the security guard at the door, blocking his way while other guests entered freely. Daniel showed him the elegant invitation with gold edges. The man examined the paper as if it were a counterfeit bill, turning it over several times before reluctantly allowing him to enter. Inside the hall, Daniel noticed the stairs. Conversations stopped when he passed by. Groups subtly moved away, creating bubbles of space around him. A gray-haired lady whispered to her companion, "Who is that young man? I don't remember him from the family." Daniel found an empty table at the back of the hall. There were no name cards, but when he tried to sit down, a middle-aged woman quickly approached him. "Sorry, these seats are reserved for the groom's family," she lied blatantly, even though there was no indication of a reservation. "Sure, no problem," Daniel replied calmly, moving to another table. The same scene repeated itself 3 times. Each rejection was accompanied by curious glances and malicious whispers. He finally settled into an isolated chair near the waiter's exit, where no one bothered to complain. The waiter passed him 4 times serving champagne without offering a single glass. When Daniel finally waved for a drink, the young attendant stammered, "Oh, air. I need to check if we still have any available," and disappeared for 20 minutes. During the ceremony, Daniel observed subtle but systematic discrimination. Warm greetings were exchanged between all the other guests, except him. Group photos were organized, but he was never included or invited. It was as if he were invisible, except when his presence bothered someone. The bride, radiant in her French lace dress, walked through the hall greeting the guests. When her eyes met Daniel's, she stopped abruptly in the middle of a conversation. Her face visibly paled. "Excuse me," she said to the relatives surrounding her, turning away abruptly and walking in the opposite direction. Daniel noticed the exact moment she recognized him, and decided to pretend she hadn't seen him. While everyone around him celebrated joyfully, Daniel remained alone, watching silently. His face remained serene, but his eyes revealed something no one else could decipher. A calmness that only exists in those who carry a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If you've ever felt the weight of silent discrimination, you know that sometimes the best response is not immediate confrontation, but strategic patience. Subscribe to the channel to find out how a moment of public humiliation would become the catalyst for a revelation that would completely change the perspective of everyone present. The DJ announced the start of the godparents' dance, and Daniel watched the elegant couples take to the floor. Every movement seemed choreographed not only to the music, but to systematically exclude him from the celebration. When he tried to approach the bar, 3 middle-aged men discreetly blocked his path, pretending to have a lively conversation about investments. "Sorry, buddy," one of them said without looking at Daniel. "We're kind of busy here." The group laughed loudly at an inside joke, but their eyes remained cold and calculating. Daniel backed away quietly, noticing how they had strategically positioned themselves to block his access. The situation worsened when he tried to use the restroom. The line magically reorganized itself whenever Daniel approached. Men who arrived after him were subtly pushed ahead, while sudden conversations arose to block his passage. After waiting 20 minutes, he gave up and went out to the garden. On the outdoor terrace, Daniel finally got a moment of peace. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message, "I'm here." As expected. The reply came in seconds, "Documenting everything? We need solid evidence." He replied, "Every detail. They're outdoing themselves." As he put his phone away, Daniel didn't notice that the bride's mother, Mrs. Coleman, was watching from the window. She marched toward the terrace like a general preparing an attack. "Excuse me, young man," her voice cut through the air like a blade. "This is a private event. I don't think you should be here alone." Her eyes scanned Daniel from head to toe, looking for flaws in his impeccable appearance. "I'm just getting some fresh air," Daniel replied calmly. "Fresh air." Mrs. Coleman laughed dismissively. "Listen carefully, I don't know how you got this invitation, but I suggest you disappear before my husband calls real security. We know everyone in this town, and you definitely don't belong in our circle." Daniel remained motionless, His hands relaxed at his sides. I understand your concern. My concern. Her voice rose an octave. My daughter is having the most important day of her life, and I won't allow it to be ruined by people like you. The final words carried a venom that needed no explanation. At that moment, other guests began to gather on the terrace. Margaret Whitfield, a local socialite known for her traditional views, approached with a fake smile. Problems here, Gloria? She asked, though her eyes had already catalogued Daniel as a threat. Just clarifying a few things about invitations and social propriety, Mrs. Coleman replied. Daniel watched the group form around him. 8 people now, all with the same expression of superiority disguised as concern. He recognized the pattern. He had seen the same formation before, in other situations, with other families. You know, Margaret said, addressing Daniel with maternal condescension, sometimes people get excited when they receive invitations to sophisticated events. But it's important to know your limits, you understand. The groom appeared on the terrace, looking for his mother-in-law. Robert Coleman Jr., heir to an insurance dynasty, stopped abruptly when he saw the situation. Mom, what's going on here? Nothing much, dear. Just advising this young man on social etiquette. Robert looked at Daniel with curiosity, then discomfort. I know you from somewhere? The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel kept his expression neutral, but his eyes met Robert's with an intensity that made the groom take a step back. I don't think we've met, Daniel finally replied. Are you sure? Your face looks familiar, Robert frowned, searching his memory. Mrs. Coleman quickly interrupted. Robert, dear, you need to get back to your guests. We'll take care of this. But Daniel had already seen what he needed to see. The recognition in Robert's eyes. Mrs. Coleman's disguised panic. The way Margaret unconsciously backed away when she sensed the tension. Of course, Daniel said softly, putting his cell phone in his pocket. I don't want to cause any more misunderstandings. As he turned to leave, Mrs. Coleman whispered to Margaret, I need to talk to Amanda immediately. If she invited this person, we need to know why. Daniel heard every word as he walked back into the ballroom. At 35, he had learned that people reveal more when they think they are not being watched. And today, every revelation was being carefully documented. Back in the main hall, Daniel noticed that the bride, Amanda, was visibly agitated near the cake table. She was talking intensely with 2 bridesmaids, her gestures indicating growing stress. When one of her friends discreetly pointed to Daniel, Amanda shook her head vigorously, as if denying something important. It was fascinating to observe how a person could be surrounded by celebration and still radiate pure panic. Amanda constantly looked in Daniel's direction, then quickly looked away when she realized he was looking back at her. The official wedding photographer approached Daniel with his camera. Excuse me, would you mind stepping aside for a moment? I'm trying to capture the party without visual interference. Visual interference. Daniel repeated calmly. Well, you know, people who don't fit in with the aesthetics of the event. Daniel smiled for the first time all day. It was not a friendly smile. Every insult, every exclusion, every moment of cruelty was being mentally catalogued. What those people didn't know was that Daniel wasn't there as a victim. He was there as a silent witness to their own natures being revealed in real time. And all of these revelations would soon prove very useful. As he watched Amanda hide behind a pillar whenever their eyes met, Daniel realized that she wasn't just avoiding an inconvenient guest. She was avoiding facing the consequences of choices made long ago, choices that had finally come to collect their price. While Amanda hid behind the pillar, Daniel discreetly removed a small digital recorder from his pocket. His experience in legal documentation had taught him that audiovisual evidence was more powerful than any oral testimony. Every prejudiced comment, every systematic exclusion, every moment of cruelty was being recorded in high definition. Test, test, he muttered almost inaudibly, checking the audio levels. The device picked up his low voice perfectly, even with the DJ's loud music in the background. His phone vibrated with a message. How are things there? David. Daniel typed quickly. Exactly as we expected. Maybe worse. The reply came within seconds. Documenting everything? We need solid evidence for Monday. Daniel smiled slightly. Every second. They're outdoing themselves. David Peterson was more than an office colleague. He was his partner at one of the largest civil rights law firms in the entire state. Together, they had taken down 3 major corporations for racial discrimination in the last year. The case they had been investigating for 8 months was about to reach its climax, and this wedding was much more than a social celebration. It was a carefully planned intelligence operation. Mrs. Coleman returned to the terrace with reinforcements. This time, she brought the family patriarch, Colonel Coleman, a retired veteran and well-known political figure in the region. At 72, he still radiated the military authority he had used to build a real estate empire based on traditional values and quality standards, not so subtle codes for systematic racial exclusion. "Young man," the colonel's voice cut through the air like a military command. "My wife has informed me of your inappropriate presence at our family event." Daniel stood up respectfully. "Colonel Coleman, it's an honor to meet you in person." The old military man's eyes narrowed. There was something about Daniel's posture, the way he maintained direct eye contact, that deeply disturbed him. "Honor," he repeated with disdain. "Young man, honor is earned through service, sacrifice, and contribution to society. It is not earned by meddling where you don't belong." "I understand your perspective perfectly, sir." The calm, articulate response caught the colonel off guard. He had expected stammering, intimidation, perhaps a humble apology. Instead, he found a composure he recognized from other officers, the quiet confidence of someone with inside information. "Where do you know our Amanda from?" asked Mrs. Coleman, joining the interrogation. Daniel paused deliberately, allowing the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Our history is complex. Some chapters are best left for more appropriate moments." The euphemism made Amanda's blood run cold. Across the room, she watched the conversation with growing panic. Every second Daniel remained, there was another step toward the abyss she had spent 3 years trying to avoid. Margaret Whitfield approached again, this time accompanied by 2 equally well-dressed and equally venomous friends. "Colonel, this young man is disturbing all the guests. Perhaps it's time for more direct measures." "What kind of measures?" Daniel asked calmly, surreptitiously activating his phone's high-quality recording mode. "The kind that people like you understand," Margaret replied with a cruel smile. "A call to the police, a criminal background check, perhaps a little investigation into how you got this invitation." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Investigations are really useful. Sometimes they reveal fascinating information about all parties involved." The neutral, almost professorial tone began to deeply disturb the group. There was something wrong with the way Daniel accepted each insult without reacting emotionally. It was as if he were collecting data rather than suffering humiliation. "You know what?" said the colonel, losing his patience. "I'm going to call Sheriff Martinez personally. He owes me a few favors and can come up with a legal reason to remove you from here." "Sheriff Martinez," Daniel repeated calmly. "Interesting choice of contact." There was something in the way he said the name that made the colonel hesitate. As if Daniel knew Martinez personally. As if he knew something about the relationship between the colonel and the sheriff that could be problematic. At that moment, Amanda finally couldn't avoid the situation any longer. She marched across the hall with forced determination, her wedding dress billowing dramatically as the guests parted to make way for her. "Mom, Dad, stop this immediately," she said, trying to sound authoritative but betraying the nervousness in her voice. "Amanda, dear," Mrs. Coleman began, "we were just—" "I know exactly what you were doing," Amanda interrupted. "And it's embarrassing." "Daniel," she turned to him with a carefully controlled expression, "thank you for coming. It was unexpected, but I appreciate the gesture." The public acknowledgement took the whole family by surprise. The colonel looked between his daughter and Daniel with growing suspicion. "Amanda," Daniel replied with an almost formal bow, "congratulations on your marriage. I hope it's everything you deserve." The word deserve carried a weight that did not go unnoticed. Amanda visibly flinched. "Do you two know each other?" Margaret asked, frustrated at losing control of the narrative. "We do," Amanda said quickly. "Daniel was an acquaintance from years ago. Law school. University." Lie. Daniel had never attended the same university as Amanda, and he knew she knew that. But the lie revealed her growing desperation to control the situation without revealing the real truth. "How interesting," Daniel murmured, "your memory of our University life together is creative. Almost poetic in its flexibility with the facts. The colonel noticed the immediate tension. Amanda, if you studied together, why all this confusion about your presence here? There's no confusion, Dad. Just miscommunication. Daniel checked his watch discreetly. 3 hours and 17 minutes of high-quality recording. Systematic discrimination, veiled threats, documented lies, and now Amanda was being forced to invent contradictory stories in real time. His phone vibrated. Status report? David. Daniel typed quickly. Protagonist panicking. Starting to lie publicly. Entire family now involved. Evidence multiplying exponentially. Perfect. Remember, the more they talk, the more ammunition they give us for Monday. Keep provoking them subtly. Daniel put his phone away and smiled politely at the Coleman family. Well, Amanda, since you mentioned our college life together, perhaps it would be appropriate to share some memories from that time with your parents. The terror in Amanda's eyes was instant and unmistakable. Daniel, maybe this isn't the time. On the contrary, Daniel continued calmly, weddings are perfect occasions to celebrate all the journeys that have brought us here. All the decisions, all the choices, all the consequences. Mrs. Coleman noticed her daughter's panic. Amanda, dear, are you okay? You look a little pale. I'm fine, Mom. Just tired. It's been a long day. Daniel watched the lie multiply in layers. Amanda wasn't just trying to hide her reaction. She was making up excuses to explain reactions she hadn't even had yet. Of course, he agreed gently. Important days can be revealing. Sometimes the weight of past decisions makes special moments a little more complicated than we expected. The colonel finally lost his patience. Enough. I don't know what game you're playing, young man, but it's over. Sheriff Martinez will be here in 20 minutes, and you will explain your unwarranted presence to him. Actually, Daniel said calmly, checking his phone again, I think Sheriff Martinez might be a little busy tonight. Urgent matters related to certain federal investigations that are coming to a close. The silence that followed was absolute. How could Daniel know about federal investigations? How could he predict the sheriff's schedule? It was then that Amanda realized she had completely underestimated the situation. Daniel wasn't just an inconvenient guest trying to embarrass her. He was there for a specific purpose, armed with information she thought was buried forever, and every minute that passed was not only documenting her own humiliation, but systematically building a case that could destroy much more than her wedding party. As the Coleman family looked at each other with growing confusion, Daniel discreetly checked his digital files. 8 months of meticulous investigation, 3 years of patient planning, and now hours of real-time evidence of discrimination. On Monday, when David Peterson presented the complete case to the federal court, the word justice would take on a whole new meaning for everyone present. Daniel's phone vibrated with a message that made his eyes light up. Federal warrant approved. Operation authorized for immediate execution. FBI on the way. David. Daniel typed back, perfect. All the protagonists assembled. Evidence collected. Beginning final phase. Amanda watched the exchange of messages with growing horror. Daniel, maybe we can talk privately about our situation. Our situation. Daniel calmly put his phone away. Interesting how you finally recognize that there is a situation between us, Amanda. Colonel Coleman completely lost his patience. Enough of this mysterious talk. Sheriff Martinez. He shouted to a man who had just entered the hall. Perfect. Sheriff, I need you to remove this individual from my family event. Martinez stopped midway when he saw Daniel. His face instantly paled. Sir. Sir Advocate General Washington. His voice trembled with obvious recognition and terror. Sheriff Martinez, Daniel greeted him formally. I believe you are here on business tonight. Yes, sir. The federal operation is proceeding according to your instructions. The silence that followed was deafening. Advocate General? The title echoed in the minds of everyone present like an earthquake. Amanda staggered, holding onto a chair to keep from collapsing. Federal operation? Mrs. Coleman stammered. What federal operation? Daniel finally stood up, assuming a posture that completely transformed his presence. Mrs. Coleman, Colonel Coleman, perhaps it would be appropriate to introduce myself properly. He removed a leather wallet from his inside pocket. Daniel Washington, Advocate General of the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. The official identification passed from hand to hand among the guests in utter shock. Advocate General, the third highest position in the Federal Department of Justice, responsible for overseeing federal prosecutions for civil rights crimes across the country. Impossible, Marguerite Whitfield whispered. You're too young, you're black. Daniel calmly completed. Yes, I am. And I've also been responsible for all federal investigations of racial discrimination in this state for the past 3 years. Amanda finally collapsed into a chair, her wedding dress scattered around her like wilted petals. Daniel, please. Please what, Amanda? Please don't reveal how you falsified evidence in the Harrison versus Department of Housing case 3 years ago. Please don't mention how you accepted bribes from Whitfield Construction to bury housing discrimination cases. Daniel took a folder out of his briefcase. Or please don't discuss how you personally destroyed the lives of 17 black families by denying them housing through illegal practices. Robert Jr., the groom, looked at his new wife with growing horror. Amanda, what is he talking about? Robert, I can explain. Explain how you worked as an in-house lawyer for Coleman Enterprises during your college years. Daniel continued relentlessly. Explain how you personally drafted the discriminatory contracts that kept minorities out of the family's real estate developments. Explain how you received $200,000 in secret payments to ensure that certain communities never had access to decent housing. The colonel attempted to regain control. These are baseless accusations. Daniel signaled to Martinez, who gestured. Instantly, federal agents entered the hall through the main and service doors. At least a dozen FBI agents in bulletproof vests and clearly visible badges discreetly surrounded the exits. Colonel Coleman, Daniel continued with cold judicial authority, you are under investigation for federal violations of the Fair Housing Act, conspiracy to deprive citizens of civil rights under the authority of the law, and money laundering through your construction company. Robert Jr. grabbed Amanda's arm. You lied to me. You said you worked in corporate law, not this. Ms. Amanda Coleman, Daniel announced formally, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. No. Amanda cried desperately. Daniel, we had a deal. You said if I cooperated. Cooperated? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, you had 3 years to cooperate voluntarily. Instead, you chose to marry into the family you were investigating, change your name, and try to bury evidence. Margaret Whitfield tried to slip away discreetly, but was blocked by 2 federal agents. Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay for questioning. Questioning? Why? Whitfield Construction is one of the key companies in this investigation, Daniel explained. Systematic discrimination in public housing, use of federal funds for projects that intentionally exclude minorities, bribery of public officials. One of the guests tried to film with their cell phone, but a federal agent kindly asked them to stop. This is an active federal operation. All recording devices must be turned over for analysis. Amanda finally broke down completely. I didn't know. I was young, I needed the money. They told me it was legal, that it was just contract optimization. Optimization. Daniel read from a document. You personally rejected 847 housing applications based solely on cultural suitability, a euphemism that your own internal emails define as keeping undesirable elements out of our premium properties. Robert Jr. physically distanced himself from Amanda. Jesus Christ, Amanda. How many families have you harmed? Daniel continued reading. Preliminary investigations indicate that the practices orchestrated by you and implemented by Coleman Enterprises resulted in the denial of housing to approximately 2,000 families, primarily African American and Latino, during the period from 2019 to 2022. Ms. Coleman collapsed into a chair. This will destroy our family, our company, our reputation. You should have considered that before implementing systematic practices of discrimination, Daniel replied without pity. The colonel attempted one last desperate move. You have no authority to conduct operations on our private property without a warrant. Daniel signaled to an agent, who handed him an official folder. Federal search and seizure warrant, signed by Federal Judge Thompson this afternoon, authorizes a complete search of this property, including all financial documents, correspondence, and electronic devices related to the business practices of Coleman Enterprises. Martinez approached Daniel respectfully. "Sir, we found the backup servers in the home office. All emails from the last 5 years are being copied according to your instructions." "Excellent. And the financial documents?" 3 safes located. Federal accountants are cataloging all contents." Amanda looked around the hall in utter panic. All the guests, people she had tried to impress, social connections she had hoped to cultivate, now looked at her like a federal criminal being arrested at her own wedding. Robert Jr. removed his wedding ring and placed it on the table. I can't be married to someone who," he shook his head, turning away from her definitively. Daniel watched the scene with professional, not personal, satisfaction. "Sheriff Martinez, make sure all the guests provide contact information for possible testimony. This investigation extends beyond the actions of the Coleman family." As federal agents began escorting key people away for questioning, Daniel checked his watch. 3 years of meticulous investigation, 8 months of planning, 4 hours of systematic documentation of discrimination in real time. Federal justice working exactly as it should. Amanda was led away in handcuffs, still in her wedding dress, passing the same waiters and staff who had witnessed her silent humiliation hours earlier. The irony did not escape anyone. As the FBI vans prepared to transport the detainees, one question hung in the air: was it possible that an entire system of privilege and discrimination could finally face real consequences? And more importantly, how many other powerful families were watching the news that night, realizing that their own secrets could be just one federal investigation away from total exposure? 6 months later, Daniel watched the local news from his office in Washington. Coleman Enterprises declares bankruptcy after federal discrimination scandal, the anchor announced. Amanda Coleman sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Sheriff Martinez had been removed from office. Margaret Whitfield had lost her construction company and faced personal bankruptcy. Colonel Coleman, at 72, would spend his final years paying federal fines that consumed the entire family fortune. Robert Jr. had annulled the marriage in record time, moving to another state to escape the scandal. The Grand Palace had closed permanently after losing its license for systematic discrimination. Daniel opened a handwritten letter. "Mr. Washington, my name is Jennifer Martinez, daughter of the former sheriff. I wanted to thank you for exposing my father's corruption. Our family can finally start over with honesty." Dozens of similar letters arrived weekly. Thomas, the waiter who had ignored him at the wedding, now worked in a federal reintegration program that Daniel personally oversaw. "Sir," Thomas had said on his first day, "I've learned that dignity has no color." Last Christmas, Daniel received a photo, 17 African American and Latino families posing in front of new homes, built with funds recovered from the Coleman investigation. Children smiled in gardens where once there had been only denied dreams. The federal case on systematic housing discrimination now served as a national model for other investigations. Daniel had turned a celebration of discrimination into the catalyst for reforms that benefited thousands of families. At that wedding, they tried to make him feel small because of his color. Instead, they revealed how small their own characters were. The real victory wasn't destroying the Colemans. It was building a system where no child would have to grow up knowing that their color would determine their opportunities. Real justice doesn't shout. It works quietly and delivers results that echo for generations. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how perseverance turns injustice into lasting change.